Have you ever watched a tutorial or saw a forum post where they use a blueprint node that you'd never even heard of before and are like, damn, I wish I knew about that one before. In fact, one of the earliest nodes I had this with was the set timer by function name. You see, if I wanted to run some code every 2 seconds, I would just do it the old programmer way. You know, have an elapsed time, incremented every frame by delta time. If it's above or equal to 2 seconds, then, execute your code and reset the timer. Easy, right? And you might wonder, why Wesley? Why? Didn't you just use a delay node? Because that's exactly what it does, right? I didn't know it existed, okay? I didn't know it existed. But the delay node isn't ideal either. It still gets called every single tick. So there's a slight overhead. And it's also quite limited in what it can do. Which isn't the case with the set timer by function name. Let's say, for example, you have a fire. And every time a player stands in there, you want them to take damage every single second. And I hear you thinking, like, you have the on-actor overlap, you add a delay node, and then you damage the player after the delay node. But what if after the delay, the player is not standing in the fire anymore? Well, sure, after the delay you can add a branch check and check if the player is still standing in the fire. But what if the fire is extinguished while the player is standing in there? Okay, sure, you can order check, but as you can kind of guess, it can become quite messy. That's where the set timer by function name comes in. But before we solve our problem, let's look at the function and its parameters. There's a name of the function that you want to call. There's an object, which is the owner of whichever function you want to call. By default, you can leave this empty, and it will take the blueprint this node is in. But if, for example, you want to update your health on the HUD, you can have the HUD as your object and update health as your function name. The time is after how many seconds you want the function to be called. If you want the function to be called every 2 seconds, you can put looping to true and fill 2 seconds into the time slot. You also have the initial start delay, in case you want the function to be called after 10 seconds, but then loop after every 2 seconds. Something important to note, however, is that the timer is not precise. So if you tell it to call a function every 3 seconds, it might call it after 2.9 seconds or after 3.1 seconds. So if you want this to be precise, you will have to look elsewhere. Now back to our problem. The big advantage of the timer by function is that it returns a timer handle, which you can use to clear and prevent it to stop looping. But also pause it, check how far along it is and whether or not it is active. So if you want the player to take damage every second when standing in the fire, you can call a set timer by function in the overlap, put looping to true and a time on 1 second. Save the handle as a variable, and as soon as the player leaves the fire, clear the timer so it stops looping, which is why the timer is easier to use as a delay node and can prevent a lot of bugs. If you're interested in learning more about timers and seeing them used in a real example, I'll suggest you stay tuned until next week, where I use these timers to make a sprint system with stamina. In the meantime, however, I highly recommend you check out my playlist on the Unreal Fundamentals, where I teach the basic systems and nodes of Unreal Engine. See you there!